Whenever you are being creative, whenever you are writing or acting or drawing, learn to monitor the level of tension that is building up. A very effective tool for creativity is to get in the habit of monitoring that tension and reducing it while you are being creative. A great portion of the human brain is to filter. Before we act, before we speak, we are consciously, subconsciously going through an elaborate process of filtering. We are deciding how best to say things, how best to do things, what would be inappropriate, what would work out, how to do it exactly to make it work out the best. So every time a human acts, whether it's speaking or doing something, it's a two-part process. The biggest reason that being artistic and being creative can become a lot more work than it has to be is because of the tension that can build up from trying to deliver more material, to generate more material, and the tension of trying to filter and refine that material while you're trying to generate it, get it on the page, get it on the canvas. Most of us have had these experiences where we've just been in that really sweet spot of inspiration where it seems like whatever we're trying to create comes out fully formed on the page and just so clear about what it's going to be and very happy and feeling really good about what we're watching being created through our actions. And when it's at its best, there is no tension. There is none of that friction created from filtering. For the writer-artist who works, let's say, 10 hours or more a week, those prime moments of inspiration are few and far between, which is no problem because really, even if creativity were always a highly tense, rigorous activity, it would still be enjoyable enough to all of us to still continue to create. When we're trying to generate new material, the new material is partially formed, vague, it hasn't been worked out, it's in the raw, there are a lot of things that need to be fixed about it, need to be clarified, and there are formulas working in it that have not yet been worked out so that they quite work yet. So while we're calling forth the new material, the new story, the new subject of a painting, that part of our brain that is always in operation wants to join in and filter and fix and change and refine and clarify and make stronger. And it's exactly that mechanism that starts to shut down the ability to get that new material out. What is a filter? A filter is something that lets some things through and blocks other things from going through. And if you put a filter on an air vent, it takes a lot more power to push as you just can't get as much air through that vent as you can if there is no filter on it. And if you take the filter off, all of a sudden it's a lot easier to push that air through. So the less that you filter your generating process, the easier it becomes, the more fun it becomes, and the more spontaneous it feels, and the more that you get done, the more content that you create, and the more you end up having to work with on the page or canvas. Now, filtering while trying to generate material can be very useful in many cases, but it's the amount of filtering, so that if you're doing a draft on a story, you can decide, I'm only going to filter it in these ways and pay attention to these things about the story and do a run-through on it. If you're trying to filter in every possible way and fix it in every possible way, you're trying to do too many things at once. You're trying to look at it at too many angles at once. And you're going to have a much easier time if you really strategize and reduce the amount of critiquing and fixing in the middle of creating that you do. There's been a study where they did MRIs on musicians and told them to improvise, to start improvising music. And when they were told to go into that mode where they were improvise music, those parts of the brain that are associated with critical thinking, would all of a sudden drop in activity. So those parts of the brain would suddenly just kind of go to sleep. So basically the musicians had trained themselves to shut down the critic, to, when they were improvising, to just, when the first idea about what kind of notes to make, what kind of music to make, were the first ones that they made. This is something you can train yourself to do, and whenever you're being artistic, think of it like an exercise and train yourself. It'll make it part of your awareness about how much of attention, and therefore how much filtering and rearranging in process that you're doing. One of the most wonderful things about making art, writing, whatever kind of art that you do, is that once you've gotten it out there, once you've gotten it on page, once you've taken it from the depths of your mind and made it, something of the world that you can look at and scrutinize, then you can refine it, then you can critique it. You really, because of this great thing that we can incarnate our creative ideas into something tangible that we can work with, we because of that, we can go ahead and decide to, if we'd like to, totally shut down the filters and the critics. And then when you go to a stage of refining, you can look at the entire project all at once, instead of, otherwise you're only getting a little glimpse of it as you're making it. You can make better decisions that way, and you can look at it from different points of view. And when you forget about it for a while and go back to it, you see it in a new light. And so those wonderful parts of our brain, the critic, the refiner, are able to work at their best when they're working on when they're working on all that material that you've already gotten into the world onto the page. And then that purely creative part of yourself, the one that can generate new content, can work at its best when it's just about getting all that information, hauling it out of the minds of our subconscious and the depths of our minds, and getting it onto page. So instead of deciding, I'm going to be one of those, sloppy artists who are just always highly prodigious and or I'm going to be a very refined artist, I write these novels that are extremely, accurate and refined, as clean as accurate math. Realize that working artistically, you can utilize the entire range. Every thought, when it is generated, is extremely raw, is extremely sloppy, is extremely unrefined, and as it goes through our brain to a point where it's spoken or it's actualized in an activity, no matter what, it's going to go through some refining. Just to take a thought, if it's a visual thought, to put it into words, goes through a lot of refining. But to to realize the beauty of raw material and to be, as an artist, to be an explorer of raw content, and to realize how much we could benefit from discovering, all the wonderful unexplored raw material. And then you can turn around and go very much into the critic mode and revel in refining and making it that much more perfect, that much cleaner, that much more accurate. So often we hear about a writer's block. How often do we hear about a musician's block, or about a comedian's block, or about a painter's block? Hardly ever. I don't know if I've really ever heard those phrases. And why is it that writing, that art form, is something that can create this problem that writers have, the writer's block? It is because writing is so involved with refining, so involved with filtering, so involved with reworking, that the filter becomes so dense to make, writers discover that their art becomes better and better and better the stronger this filter gets, and they build it up and they build it up, and they discover new ways of filtering and new ways of refining. Well, it gets to a point where nothing can get through because that filter is just too built up. So a great way of, especially as a writer, but all artists should always pay attention to how much tension you're feeling when you're working, and pinpoint what is creating that tension. It could be a very little thing. The clutter on your desk could be creating the tension. Find ways while you're working that if you put 1% of your creative time into reducing that tension, it's going to go easier for you. You're going to produce more. You're going to have more content to work with. You're going to feel more comfortable about working with a greater diversity of content, and your artwork will improve. Literally, I'll go out at I'm not speaking literally, I'll at 4 a.m. I'll go to the beach and dig up seaweed and driftwood and drag it back and pick up moss and weird car parts and drag all this stuff into my room, and I'll make a big mess, the biggest mess I can make, and it's all tangled and it's like different colored string and someone else's family photos from the other coast, and just things I don't understand. It's all incongruent, and I'm just piling more of it, more and more and more of it into the room. That's the first phase. And the second phase is to start cleaning it up, to start organizing it, to start fitting it, puzzle piecing it together and fitting it together. So my creative strategy is first to make the biggest mess possible, and then to go through the great enjoyment of cleaning it up and refining it. If a musician can train his mind to shut off the inner critic for the best improvised music, to learn to be able to do this does not just quiet the inline critiquing and refining. It enables a new way of seeing. It enables a new mode of thinking, a very powerful mode of thinking where creative inspiration is very achievable. Now, having an inline critic and refiner of our actions and what we say is very important for survival in society today. But the artists, when they're by themselves, can safely learn to turn that part of their brain off in order to plug in to that great power of creativity that can be achieved. It's very helpful to have an attitude about what you're about to do when you're creative. Ask yourself, look back at the times when you were most inspired. Did you sit down and were you about to make some art that you were going to present to someone, or were you about to do it for a purpose, or was it a time when you were just bored and fooling around and stumbled upon great inspiration? I know my own experience is that if I go to my work with an approach that this is throwaway art, this is something, I'm not trying to get a product out of it, I'm not trying to do it to make money, I'm not trying to do it to impress anyone, and the whole purpose of sitting down to do art is to get closer to inspiration. You've heard about yogis who train themselves to lower their body temperature, and about people who practice karate who are able to stand in one pose for many hours and whatnot. An artist is in a very similar position. They can train. There's really not much of a limit to how good you can get at this. So if you continually get better and better at shutting down your inner critic, you're going to continually feeling the better and better improvements of your ability to come up with original artwork. I want to thank everyone who has left comments. I really appreciate the feedback. I read them, and it encourages me to make a lot more of these tutorials. If you have any time at all, please visit my website, solomation.com, and look at the lifelong project I'm embarked on. And I hope that your creative projects go well. Please hit the like button, subscribe, tell a friend about my tutorials, and have a good day.